It is my pleasure to introduce our opening keynote speaker. Our opening keynote speaker this evening is someone who understands space mobility not as a concept, but as an operational necessity. Major General Stephen Purdy currently serves as the military deputy in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space Acquisition and Integration, where he helps oversee more than $24 billion annually in research and development, shaping the future of space capability. In his current role, General Purdy sits at the intersection of strategy, acquisition, and execution for the nation's space enterprise. And he brings to that role firsthand operational experience, including his time at the Cape, where he was quad-hatted across launch, range operations, enterprise integration, and assured access acquisition. What makes this moment especially meaningful is that the Space Mobility Conference itself exists because of General Purdy's vision. This conference was his idea, born from a belief that sustained advantage in space would depend on our ability to maneuver, reinforce, and operate over time, not just deploy once. Please join me in welcoming the founder of this conference and our opening keynote speaker, Major General Stephen Purdy. Good luck, sir. Yep.
All right. Oh my goodness. Okay. First, hey, let me give you a couple of thanks here. Thanks to you all for staying late, because I know you could be at the bar right now. So I appreciate that, honestly. Thank you to Ryan and the conference, not only for an invite, but also for, we've literally been working logistics with them the whole day long. So I really appreciate that. And then I think some of the other speakers moved around to include perhaps General Whiting. So my thanks to them as well. So, all right. What have Julius and I just been through? 4 to 5 inches of snow, 2+ inches of sleet and frozen rain, 2 days of U.S. government closure in D.C., 5 flights canceled, 12 flights delayed, and I lost count. Actually, I stopped counting at 12. 1 no-go plane, which I've never had that happen before. 1 missing crew, 3 timed out crew, 16+ hours in the airports. I've lost time. I stopped counting. 2 Ubers, a taxi, a rental car, 3 Metro rail trips with backup plans to fly down to Tampa and drive to Orlando at 4 in the morning. 5+ rental car reservations. So for movie lovers out there, trains, planes, and automobiles, and airplane. We're like somewhere in between all of that. So that's what that's what we've been through. So I honestly, I'm going to be honest, I didn't think there was any prayer in the world we were going to be here. So I'm actually thrilled. So logistics. I just told you logistics. I'm living logistics right now. I'm not loving logistics right now, I'm going to be honest with you, but I'm living logistics. And sometimes logistics loves you, right? Logistics makes the world move around or perhaps not move around. Logistics is incredibly important, and the last 48 hours has been a tremendous example of that. Logistics, switching to military, wins wars. We all know that. We know the stories of World War II and the massive logistics activity in World War II and even since. Logistics will impact space. We know that. I mean, this is a conference really about logistics, but it's always good to sort of hear it to ourselves. It already is impacting space. Look at the civil side, the return of the astronauts. You had other countries with similar kinds of situations, kind of sudden returns and other activities. You have space station discussions in terms of ISS, commercial space stations, how's all that going to work? You have all the lunar infrastructure and lunar discussions. We have warfighting, and I know General Whiting talked here earlier, and I saw a little bit of a news article, Space News, about his summary, so I appreciate that. I got to skull up a little bit on the plane. Logistics in space continues to increase in importance, continues to increase. So what I want to do today is, hey, let's look at where we are, where we've come from, what senior officials are saying, look at what we're actually doing, and give ourselves a call to action. Because I know it can be a real tendency for a lot of folks to say we're not doing anything. That's not quite true, but the story is much more complicated. So I kind of want to go through it all and have a discussion about it. But first, let's go back into history, and it's not a very far history. It's only just a few years ago. Back in the 21 to 23 era, I was here at the Cape in the 45th. We picked up the role of AETS, and we ended up absorbing kind of all launch. And much like General Whiting was talking about earlier in terms of this overall architecture, and it has to be beyond launch, that's where our heads started to turn. And we were looking at 30 or so launches a year back then. It seems there was a lot back then. But we hypothesized that we were going to be in a couple hundred launches a year pretty soon. And I would comment it was about 150, I think, last year, ish, give or take, 10. So, but as part of that, we started thinking about expanding logistics into space, expanding launch into space. Hey, does launch actually continue? Can you do some maneuver to continue getting a satellite into orbit? And that was actually a vivid discussion in NSSL Phase 3 that we actually had. We determined at the time that the industry just wasn't there to cover us in the near term, the next few years for the NSSL contract, so we left it off. But we knew that we were going to have to address it soon. And as we started looking around, rocket cargo started to become a topic of discussion, and there were companies starting to knock on the door on on-orbit storage deployment. Certainly one company was out in the forefront years ago with on-orbit maneuver, augmented maneuver, but multiple other companies were coming along. Refueling, repair, perhaps even rearming, reconstitution, and then some really interesting side discussions, space stations, junkyards, things like that. Roombas in space, I think I seem to remember. At the time, there was no money in this whole area, but we knew we needed to move. And I have a personal bias when it comes to these kind of situations. When you have an interesting technology, not a lot of clear direction or requirements, to me, it's always best to take a program manager who's been trained to go look at industry, look at technology, go talk with the requirements community, and go pull all of that together and put a bunch of COAs together, a bunch of courses of action. Well, hey, what can we do? What can we do to go forward? So that's what we did. We established the SAML office. I call it SAML still. I think the team calls it SML. To me, that term means something else, and so I'm stuck with SAML in my brain. I'm just old like that. But we established that SAML office, Space Access, Maneuver, and Logistics. It's really about the maneuver and logistics portion of that. Over here at Patrick, Space Force Base. And we decided to establish this conference and join it with these other conferences that were happening. It seemed the right thing to do, because when we looked around, there wasn't anyone talking specifically about this topic in any other conference. It was usually small sats or other specific sats or just all space or just all defense. And so we wanted to hone this particular area. And that's how it came about. And I do remember a famous quote, and I know that my quote writers have got it written down. A few people document my quotes. We don't have money, but we will provide the leadership. I said it on stage back then, and I'll say it now, although the situation has changed a little bit. We've found avenues for some money. It's not as much money as we all want, but there's more out there than you might think. Now, a warning here as I go through the rest of this discussion. We do not speak all with one voice, and that's by design. That's natural. The Space Force the Space Force service side owns requirements. They own the PALM. They own the PPBE process. They own the future direction of the force, technology direction, et cetera. The program management side, SAF SQ, the PEOs and PMs, they own that acquisition and integration. They're kind of the implementation arm. And so both sides have different perspectives that are just as viable. And then you have that warfighter perspective as well, another third voice. And so it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. Now, as I mentioned, it turns out there is money available, and I'm going to kind of talk about that, but leading the witness here, SpaceWorks, SBIR funds, those kinds of things are kind of where we're heading. But let me take a quick diversion. Lest you think that, hey, we have this interesting technology, but we need this massive program of record in the ages of old. We've moved away from that in acquisitions and space acquisitions. And I talked about that recently in the conferences, if you were at SSC Industry Days or Space Enterprise Consortium, but just a quick summary of what we highlighted there. We've been reforming for quite a few years in the Space Force. We stood up Space RCO in 18, SDA in 19, Space Force itself in 19, StratVise in 20, SpaceWorks in 21. The first Space Acquisition Executive was formed in 22. SAF SQ was formed in late 22. Calvelli, the first Space Acquisition Executive, in his first couple of years, 22 to 24, went about reforming program management, both the program managers and the active program management itself, getting after small sats, smaller satellites, ground systems, more rapid ground systems, low NRE, fixed price contracts, iterative developments, and canceling non-performing programs. He was really laying the groundwork for where we are today, because we've executed pretty dramatically on that front. And it's a different way of acquisitions than we were, say, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Last year, as I was acting SAE, we moved on. We did an analysis of 60 different programs to figure out how can we modify these programs, how can we remove requirements from these programs to get after commercial existing technology and companies, with some amount of success, I would add. Maximizing commercialization, and frankly, I would argue a little bit of a victory lap here. Hey, I feel like we led the Department of War in the major acquisition reform that we saw coming down last year through the executive orders, SecWar's direction, and then ultimately the NDAA. All along, though, SpaceWorks has been steadily working over on the side with SBIRs and interesting tools called TAC-5s and Strat-5s, and that's the important piece. Since 20, when they were established, $700 million have gone into Strat-5s and TAC-5s. That's been matched by $1.9 billion of private funds, private equity. Multiple mission examples, TAC-RS, UDL, autonomous vehicles, smaller sats, higher power, and satellite servicing. More on that later. An early analysis that was given to me 2 weeks ago by a consultant in the industry stated that the Space Force's investment through those SBIRs and Strat-5s and TAC-5s on the new space companies resulted in a 3x to 5x valuation increase on those companies from before and after. That's plus 40% or $1.7 billion. That's real change to those companies, real money. And here's the interesting thing, and I think most people don't realize this. We actually crossed the valley of death, and I will say, crossed the valley of death. People claim we don't. We did. But it was through 2 actions. We'll claim that we did it purposefully, but we'll just take that victory lap and we'll discuss later whether we actually purposefully planned all that. But as SpaceWorks was applying those SBIRs and Strat-5 funds, we were simultaneously reforming many of our acquisitions and changing the requirements, stopping many of them. We've canceled or stopped 25 programs in the last few years because they started overrunning and went out. As you go back out, as you modify the requirements and go back out, as you set up IDIQs or OTAs with multiple award winners, all of these companies that had been going through the Strat-5 process and had been launching satellites into orbit or are on path were now viable contenders for these programs. They were actually viable in source selections now. That's how we crossed the valley of death, and no one kind of realizes that. And it's one reason why I'm very passionate about this particular SBIR reauthorization in Congress. There's some things that they need to address, totally fine with that. I just ask that, hey, this unduly impacts space, and I'm looking forward to a successful reauthorization. SQ had 200 industry interactions last year, and we have purposely driven that kind of an attitude to the program managers and PEOs. Why? Because we know all of you are out there doing new things, working new activities with private capital. And so we want to figure out how to leverage that in our programs. I've told the program managers repeatedly, it's time to see if you can't be a change agent within your own program. And if your own program is not going the right direction or too slow, find another path and bring more people on board. And there are several programs over the last year that we did just that. And we continue to do that. We did it just a few weeks ago, from a stop work and pivoting to get onto an IDIQ to get multiple people on board to participate. So now supported by the NDAA, SecWar directions, et cetera, we have multiple working groups. I think the most relevant interest item for this group is the AATS PEO is becoming the Space Access Portfolio Acquisition Executive, PAE, Space Access PAE. Colonel Eric Z is appointed as the acting Space SAE. For you all, for the most purpose, it's the same people you're going to deal with. We're working a whole lot of process change behind the scenes, and that's a whole nother topic, and frankly, happy to do that offline. Also, for those that aren't tracking, Tom Ainsworth is the new PTDO SAE. So I've gone back to military deputy, and he's got the SAE stick now, so just to close that loop. So enough about org changes, and let's go back to space mobility and logistics. So where are we today? So I thought I'd give you an interesting perspective. And what I decided to do was pull quotes, because nothing says where we're headed like quotes from senior leaders, frankly, because that's what they really think and mean. And hey, all credit to Scott Sadler and his newsletter, because these quotes came out of that newsletter. Fair warning to many of you, some of you aren't going to like these quotes, but this is a good representation of where the thinking of the senior leadership is, and I'm going to talk to some thoughts after it. Okay, CSO, Aviation Week, 26 March 2025. I'm more of a cheerleader in this mission space than I am of funding these efforts. General Grant, Breaking Defense, 11 April 25. Near-term problem where we have legacy satellites we can't maneuver without regret. We have limited ability to fuel or refuel. What can we do affordably now in the near term while we deal with legacy capability, and what are we doing to look forward? The S-5, which was then Lieutenant General Bratton, Space News 5 May 25. I don't know that I see clear military advantage in refueling. Refueling isn't black or white. Aerial refueling extends the range of the aircraft. You can go further, deliver capability further across the Earth. With spacecraft, the issue is life extension. Many satellites, especially older military ones, are retired not because they run out of fuel, but due to technical failures. He goes on to say, part of the challenge is the current generation of satellites. Many weren't designed to be refueled or repaired. So with the fleet flying out today, the answer is not much in terms of realistically servicing. Show me the military advantage. If I go to war with China, how does refueling help me beat them? Then I'm super interested. Hold that thought. But if you can't show me that, it's a science project. And then probably my favorite quote, General Brown, same article. We, Space Force, really want commercial to lead in refueling. And commercial really wants DoD to lead in refueling. And we're all like staring each other down on who's going to blink first. I think that probably is a really good summary of kind of where we're at. From the Hill, Representative Robert Alderholt, HACD, General Salt in a hearing on 6 May, a few days later. General Saltzman, can you speak to how the Space Force plans to meet Space Command's target on operational demonstration of sustained space maneuver? CSO response, we are on contract to demonstrate a refueling shuttle, propellant depot, and a satellite we call Tetra 5, second demo in 27. Purpose is to collect the data, determine what is best, what the standards look like, what interfaces are most productive, so then we can invest in that technology. Lieutenant General James, U.S. Spacecom DEP, refueling has some disadvantages. It's a big fat target, depending on how you establish your refueling systems. Our analysis that we've done on the Spacecom side, and we've done a lot of this, kind of shows there's a real case for refueling. So he's giving you both sides. And let me just scroll down here. Kelly Hammett in the Schriever Space Power, 24 June 25. On-orbit refueling, the term should really be maneuver and logistics. It's a space warfighting logistics. I think the service will evolve, more force design work. Space Force, when the Space Force was first established, they couldn't take on everything in the universe in terms of things they are fielding. Charles Galbraith here, Mitchell Institute. It's the best interest of the Space Force to embrace, actively pursue a future objective architecture founded in on-orbit logistics. General Whiting, who you heard from earlier, this was in Breaking Defense 5 August. Sustained space maneuver is crucial to our resilience and lethality through the mobility and endurance of the aircraft. It's not about getting from point A to point B, it's about maneuvering for advantage, choosing the path with purpose, making moves that surprise your opponents, protect your mission, maximize your lifespan. VCSO, General Bratton again, now as the VCSO, 22 January 26. I think we'll be doing a lot more space superiority activities than we are today. In-orbit space refueling does not offer the same operational benefits in space as for aircraft. It may save me a lot of money, but that may be a reason to do it. But from a military perspective, the advantages have not been proven in war games. One concern is that added infrastructure introduced new vulnerabilities. I have not seen in wargaming the military advantage during conflict that refueling brings to space. So some thoughts here. I thought those were some really interesting quotes to kind of tease out where do we go from here. Many similar discussions in there. Almost all of them focused on warfighting. We see a non-alignment, as I mentioned earlier, just due to natural organizational differences. It's very natural for the combatant command to think fight tonight, to think warfighting, what do I need? It's also very natural for the service, as is organized, trained, and equipped, to have to think about bigger and broader issues. They have to balance the real budget. They have to build all the weapon systems, handle all their personnel stuff, do all the MILCON, and a host of other issues. It's a big resource balancing game. And that's why you see the different perspectives. Clearly, in this mission space, we need increased analysis. That's job one on everybody's job jar. We need more SAML capabilities in war games, job two, clearly. SWAC has interesting war games. They're kind of like futures-based war games where they kind of do sort of technology trades. There's other war games that the Space Force does. That's the second thing. We need to make sure that we're representing these technologies in there. We need to be able to articulate the military value versus the economic value. We tend to, in the program management side, can sometimes get down that track. We'll do cost trade benefits. Hey, it's all about military value. That's the whole purpose at the end. Military value versus economic value. And I would suggest many in industry, that's not an expertise to them, obviously. You're thinking more economics, you're thinking commercial business case. An insight I would have for you when I've debated this with others, I oftentimes will get someone that says, hey, you don't need to refuel, you can just buy satellites because they're becoming really cheap. My argument is PPBE. If it takes you 1 to 2 years to go develop a palm and get it over to the hill, and it takes the hill a year to get through that process, and then it takes you 3 years to build, you're 4 to 6 years out from the time that you decided you wanted to go buy another cheap satellite. If we don't have a production line going that is constantly producing new satellites every few months, constantly, through all the churn of the palm process, that argument falls flat. Eventually we can get to that point, and we want to get our contracts to that point where we're just constantly buying off. But until we get to that point, refueling does offer an advantage there. Another thought I'd have for everyone in the room. Absent excess Space Force funds on this topic, industry likely needs to lead with ideas of all the servicing as a service and help us with deep analysis and wargaming level analysis. Now let me go back. As a service, we've talked about this particular mission area being one of the prime examples of as a service. In our commercial strategy, I think it is, it lists out SAML as, hey, we're looking at that one as like, a huge as a service model. Lots of aspects related to that, because if we're talking about true warfighting support, we get into some interesting discussions. If the combatant command is expecting a refueler to be there because they're going to hit the gas all the way and we're in a war situation, and we're building as a service and we haven't put in the proper mechanisms, contract mechanisms, be it CASR or be it others, we're going to have a problem and the operators won't believe that it's there. And so I'd ask everyone in industry to think deeply about that because that is a very real and valid concern. So it's a thing that we have to work and think through. It's one reason why we work so hard with CASR and some of the other ones through COMSO and Tremillo to figure out ways around that to lock in some of these service pieces. And then the deep analysis and wargaming analysis, I've mentioned that earlier. And I'm going to mention it right here too. As I talk about a final couple of topics. Understand the difference between vision and analysis. I think that's important because we conflate these a lot of times. I am a vision type person, for example. I tend to see the future and what technology is doing and where it's logically going to go. I think cause and effect, and then I think about how can I take military advantage of that in the future. It's one of the reasons why we pursued SAML years ago, things like that. However, analysis is equally as valuable, and I would argue almost more important. Both are important, but they're both in different sectors. In the Department of War, in the PPBE process, vision doesn't count. You need analysis. And for those that don't exist in the Department of War, let me just kind of run through it. In the PALM funding activity, you need analysis. You can't get out of the field comm or a managed comm without analysis. Your 8 will cut you off and not fund your project. The Space Force 8 will not fund you without analysis. Why? Because the DAF will kill it if there's no analysis. And why does the DAF kill it? Because Comptroller and OMB and CAPE will kill it. And so it's this stair-step process. You have got to have deep level analysis when you go in for trades at that OSW level. And how it works is you never get whatever you want. They always back you off some amount. And so you have to have good enough analysis to say that, hey, if you took 10%, 20%, 30%, 40% off, what capability am I still getting? If you can't articulate that quickly and easily, you're done. You're out. See you next palm cycle next year. That's actually how it works. The PPBE process demands analysis, not vision. Now, it's led by vision, and the leadership will drive vision in terms of where they want to go, but which projects we're going to do, it's analysis that wins the day. And the Hill is kind of a blend of the two, really, vision and analysis. So deep analysis in the Space Force is somewhat limited. So we have SWAC, which is a world-class analytical organization, trusted at the DAF and at the OSW level. When SWAC has done their deep level analysis and they walk in the door, they're trusted by CAPE and others. The problem is that there's a quantity and capacity issue there. That deep level analysis takes a long time. So they're kind of on a 5-year analytical cycle. So if you're in a certain mission area, you may have 3 or 4 more years till they get to you. That's the problem. And so where is SAML in there? It's out there, 3 to 4 years. Why? They have near-term fish to fry back to the service's priorities. And so that's why I'm going to argue that industry's help here, particularly tapping into your venture capital, private equity backing for analysis, is potentially a helpful aspect here that could get us out of this kind of do loop that we're in. So all isn't lost. In the absence of investments, direction, and the PALM and requirements, there are still avenues. If the acquisition system is engaged in thinking and they have vision, we will move out and we'll build plans. We'll do it the hard way. And that's kind of what we've been doing in this particular mission area. We're not sitting around waiting for someone to do analysis and requirements. A classic acquirer would be like, I have no requirements. I have no analysis. I'm not going to do anything. That's the classic answer for acquisition. Give me a requirement, and then I will go out to industry and go procure said thing. No, the reality is it takes us leaning forward to understand what's happening. And I'm going to argue we've been doing that quite a bit. So back in 23, obviously, we set up this first space mobility conference. We established the SML office, as I mentioned, and we awarded the first SML contract. By the way, that was a program office of one person, because we took it out of Hyde. Because we knew we needed to get after it, but it's not a funded PALM program. So we took it out of Hyde. We couldn't even use our normal command structures, boards, et cetera. By the way, that's exactly the process. That's how we do it. When we started OTTI, Operational Test Training, we started with one program manager, who then grew to be a PEO, and then we got them more program managers and more functional support, and funding flowed. We started that with intelligence programs. Basically, 1 PM to start putting the story together and put courses of actions together. We started that with the PMAIT project, 1 individual. We started with a Guardian Watch project. And we have the other PAE that we've announced, SBST, is literally an entire PAE of 1. He's an acting PAE, and it's him full-time, Colonel Ryan Fraser. I mentioned him in SSC Industry Days, as he tries to pull together all the different areas of SBST. That's the process. And they've done pretty good over the last few years. Look at where we've come. So, by the way, SpaceWorks back in 23 also, orbital prime effort. There was 125 phase 1 projects, 50 phase 2 projects, SBIRS phase 1 and phase 2, totaling 112 million in SBR investment, which, according to them, achieved 2.2 billion in additional funding when you go looked at 600 million in government funding, which included NASA. That was 240 million of it. 1.2 billion in VC funding, and another 400 million of commercial contracts, the commercial industry. There is actually money out there flowing around in this mission space. In 2024, the SAML office awarded a second contract, issued the DoD commercial integration strategy, and between 24 and 25, over 46 companies were awarded additional SBR contracts, totaling over 80 million. Then come to 25 last year. And 25 established a new dedicated funding line for SML. That's important and a major milestone. Why? Because we did some analysis and we made the arguments within the system that this was an important thing to get after. Launch, a quick nod to our launch guys, based on the original vision, they got up to 175 launches last year, combined Eastern and Western range, which is just amazing, and shows you that commercial support, and shows you also the importance of building a commercial contract structures and whatnot to support all that. U.S. Spacecom, in partnership with SpaceWorks and SSC, conducted a sustained maneuver challenge last year, 10 contract awards totaling $20 million. And the SML mission area was selected for funding by OSW's, the Department of War's APFIT program, which will procure a space tug vehicle to extend the life of some operational constellations. This is the first Space Force APFIT program. We actually got a couple this year. We had never gotten money from that set of programs before, and so that was a nice, healthy amount. Again, we're slowly building up, and that's all under that kind of R&E, R&D, and OSW that we're working with to get this up into a program of record. The next 12 months, quite a bit of activity. Space Mobility Logistics Program Office fully funded 2 on-orbit demonstrations that are ready to launch in 26. Demonstrations on the horizon for late 26 and early 27. Both a really interesting maneuver project. So Starfish, I'm going to name some companies. I don't normally do that, but I wanted to name them here for this project. Starfish will deliver and operate Otter 1, which will then do the rendezvous and proximity operations, docking with GEO. It's an orbital transfer, extend the mission 2 years. It's a result of a STRATFI, $67 million STRATFI project. First of a kind mission for removing dead satellites. After the demo, this is key, after the demo, the residual operations will provide Spacecom with some responsive capability. That's important because that's about where we're at now. We're not about demos anymore, even though I said demo and it really kind of is a demo. We're about trying to figure out a way to do some demo, do the tech, and then get into operations as fast as possible. We're doing that in every other mission area, and this is no different. And the faster we can get some of these basic capabilities in the operator hands and allow them to see and to start thinking about the use cases, the better. The other major project, Astroscale US, is building and launching the APSR receiver, known as the Provisioner. And so this one is really interesting because this is a good example of where DIU has worked with AFRL, has worked with SSC, and they've all pooled their funds. And you've got the depot, the fuel depot, you've got the receiving vehicle, and then you have sort of this refueler that's going to move back and forth. It's a whole mini architecture unto itself. Really interesting, and again, really good, clever work by our program managers to glue together a bunch of different funding sources to deliver an actual capability. This isn't science projects, these are going to be real capabilities with some real leave behind. And it shows you how that entire team is thinking through. So we have a few more things coming down the pike. So if you don't know what SpaceWorks challenges are, they're a way that SpaceWorks helps the PEOs connect with industry, venture capital, academia to do deeper market research in areas. We use the SBIR contracts to do that, build closer relationships with companies, track key individuals and companies in tech that may want to then transition into a STRATFI, into an actual operational capability. So I have a new announcement for you today. So this has not been announced yet. Arthur from SpaceWorks asked me to pass on this announcement. So SpaceWorks is going to do an in-domain orbital logistics challenge with Assured Access to Space team this next year, pending FY26 SBR reauthorization. So a quick caveat there. So pending that, they plan to move on out. It is $20 million, so they have $20 million in SBR funds to sort of recreate ground logistics in space. And their thinking is cross-orbital regimes, orbital warehousing, propellant distribution, orbital transfer vehicles, precision metering inspection, novel orbital network mechanics, et cetera, LEO, GEO, and beyond. Why do we continue doing this when we've already done a few? Well, multiple new companies are forming, and we want to continue leveraging these SBIR activities and AppBid activities and other funds that are available to continue building any little capability that we can. One refueler up there to be able to refuel something is better than none. If we can get 2, that's great. And then eventually we'll work our way up to a program of record. What I didn't mention in here, actually have in my speech that I should, we purposely are trying at the SQ level, at the SAE level, to inject refueling requirements in the system, or at least the capability in the system. So you saw that with RGXX, the GSAP replacement system this last year. We are trying as hard as we can to inject that in there to see what industry proposes. The problem is this is a severe chicken and the egg problem. RGXX is a good example. We're designing an IDIQ to have multiple companies on there. That's really great for the commercial base. There's 10, 20, 30 companies that could potentially do that mission. Here's the problem. They all have different fuel. And so if I go build a Space Force refueler, what fuel am I going to put in there? So we've challenged the team to work with industry, like, hey, industry, can you bring a refueler? Can we take a little bit off the top, and can you bring a refueler in along with your capability? So we're working as hard as we can to sort of piece together and glue together these pieces in here. By the way, I should also mention, I think it hit the press a couple days ago, SDA, Space Development Agency, has had multiple studies in this area, and I think they awarded a pretty healthy contract a few days ago to get after removing LEO dead satellites as well. So there's also additional really cool commercial-driven activity over the next few years, and so really happy about all of that, and I like where we're headed. From a macro perspective, and I'm going to go over just a couple minutes, but from a macro perspective, AETS is thinking in kind of three buckets. Strategic, long-term, balancing industry, the infrastructure, think of what they're doing in the spaceports and the NSSL Phase 3, trying to set up contracts to allow any new money that we get to come in to bring all the players on board. We have multiple players in the end game. That's our own desire, and that's straight out of the NDAA and SecWar's direction on Acroform anyway. Operational, the second bin, which is all about sustaining and maneuvering assets in orbit. Think like theater type of logistics. And then tactical, that last mile, that responsive warfighter need. So tactically responsive launch, that they tend to, they support the tactical responsive space element. They've really done some amazing work the last 3 GPS launches, rapidly putting them on contract. So they're thinking about that in terms of a rapid response, kind of refueling, removal, kind of things like that. And allow me a spot of vision to add on top of that. On-orbit storage of warfighting material. I think it'll be big. We don't talk about that very often, but that is also logistics in another form. You store it in orbit, return it to terrestrial for responsive space needs. There's a couple of different companies I know for sure that are actually exploring this activity. You build something in space and bring it down. But also I've talked with Transportation Command, Special Operations Command. They're really interested in that kind of stuff. So I'd ask you to think through some of that as well. And then of course we have lunar logistics. So finally, call to action for everybody. Sort of laid out the background. The urgency is real. The old ways are too slow. We are moving acquisitions across the board, and this particular area is moving along with it. And particularly in this particular area, slowly piecing together teams, program offices, architectures, funding, actual contracts with actual money to build step by step, piece by piece. Commercial industry is doing likewise, and I really appreciate what you're doing and how you're leading forward. We're increasingly tapping into StratFis and AppFits and other funding sources to be able to fund these projects and get them up into orbit. So I did provide some earlier thoughts to you for your consideration, but a few more. To our industry partners, please continue to engage in forums like Confers, Cosmic, AIA, et cetera. We've got to get after interoperability and common standards. The government cannot, should not, and will not drive that. We will be happy to host the meetings. We'll be happy to store the requirements. We engage, as SSIO has done tremendous system engineering work over the last few years, but we do not want to be articulating that. You all are the experts in this. We'll help from a requirements and a contractual space, et cetera. So I need your help there. I also need you to bring your boldest technologies and boldest thoughts. We're open for business and new ideas and new tech. Just with the caveat, just realize the situation that we're in, and if we can find some way to glue together an architecture and add you to a piece of it, even better. To our allies, join us. Resolute Space Exercises are actively exploring logistics architectures. We look and hope to have these architectures allied by design from day one. To academia and researchers, hey, we really need help solving a lot of hard problems. There's new theories, there's new tech, there's always invention. Hey, the act of getting up there and doing a refueling, that's just the basics. Okay, we did it. We didn't stop in refueling years ago in the Air Force. We continue building new tech, and I need that continued thought exercise by the academic side. To the Guardians, in particular, our Joint Force warfighters, we're committed to giving you the tools you need to win. Your feedback and operational insights are absolutely critical so that we build the right thing. We want to guide in the right direction. The innovators and small businesses out there and large businesses, hey, leverage the flexible acquisition tools available. We want to hear from you. Space Force Front Door is a good place to start. AETS in this mission area, obviously, continue working with them. We're definitely interested in as-a-service models. And you can see that we have plenty of direction from EOs and otherwise to continue to build the American industrial base, which we're all about. And then finally, to everyone in this room, think about how your work and your activity contributes to the logistics backbone of space power. Every innovation, every partnership, every single effort counts in this space. We're really building an entire new military function. There's no easy button. Logistics tends to be in the background and often forgotten or left aside, especially when resources are scarce. But it's absolutely critical to modern life and warfighting. My last 48 hours, again, demonstrated that modern life runs on logistics. And just like the internet and electricity, we tend to forget about it until it's not there. So our challenges are immense. The opportunity is greater. Working together, we can get there. I really thank you all again for staying later. I really appreciate it. Thank you to all of you for all the work that you've done in this area. I would argue by any stretch of a metric or imagination, where we've come in the last 3 years is amazing, and all credit to the Shared Access to Space team for bringing us here. It is a labor of love among this team, and it's made twice the difficulty because they're doing it by trying to piece together elements, and hopefully I was able to kind of help illuminate to industry. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Oh my God.
Please welcome back Ryan Brown.
Thank you, General Purdy. Thank you to General Purdy's team for getting him here. As we close out today, I want to once again thank Amentum for their sponsorship for their support as our ballroom sponsor this year. Their partnership made it possible to bring together the kind of voices that are needed for this conversation, and we're grateful for their continued commitment to the mission. I also want to thank all of our speakers, panelists, and participants. What stood out today was not just the depth of expertise in this room, but the seriousness with which people approach the challenge in front of us. When we opened this morning, we talked about the reality of operating in space, a domain that is unforgiving, contested, and increasingly central to how the Joint Force operates. That reality hasn't changed over the course of the day. What has advanced, hopefully, is our shared understanding of what it will take to operate there effectively and at scale over time. One of the core ideas behind this conference is that space logistics is no longer just a supporting function. It is becoming a warfighting capability in its own right, an enterprise that enables maneuver, resilience, and mission assurance in a contested domain. That enterprise is still taking shape. The capabilities exist in pieces. The innovation exists across government and industry, but alignment across warfighters, acquirers, and partners is what will determine whether these pieces come together into something operationally meaningful. That is what defining the space logistics enterprise is really about. Not declaring the answer, but building a shared framework, a common language that allows this community to move from isolated efforts towards an integrated, executable approach to space logistics. This conference was never intended to solve everything in one day. It exists to help define what matters now, what must happen next, and how this community continues to work year by year as the space logistics enterprise matures, doctrine evolves, and capabilities come online in alignment with what the warfighter needs. Thank you for being a part of that effort and for the work you do every day to move this mission forward.